The S&B Cold Air that we have here today would be an awesome choice for the 2018 through 2020 3.5 EcoBoost owners who are looking for one of the nicest sealed options available at a very attractive price point. Now, the S&B will feature a durable ABS plastic build, reusable oiled filter, and will not require the use of any custom or can tuning. Now, price point for the 5-star rated option here is going to live in that mid $300 range and is backed by S&B's signature million-mile warranty. So I always like to say intakes are one of those gateway mods that oftentimes gives truck owners the ability to get comfortable with modifying their own rigs at home. Now, not only is there an instant improvement in both appearance and performance, but the satisfaction of tackling something like this on your own in the driveway or garage is certainly going to build confidence for the next modification. Now, the S&B that we are talking about here today is going to be one of the most popular in the category for the EcoBoost truck, with well over 100 5-star reviews. And as always, guys, I'm going to encourage you to read up on some of those first, as it will definitely help to hear from fellow EcoBoost owners when making your final decision on the topic of an intake. Now, as far as your major components are concerned, well, two biggies are going to jump out at me. First and foremost, you are getting a very nice sealed enclosure that's been designed and built extremely well. Now, sealed enclosures are always going to get a thumbs up from me personally, as they're going to be one of the best bets at reducing high intake air temperatures, especially when the truck is stationary. Now, when you're moving, obviously it's not a big deal, but if you're the type of truck owner who sits in traffic a lot, especially in a hot climate, well, this can definitely be a factor and help contribute to a sluggish feeling truck. Now, inside that sealed enclosure will be one of S&B's signature oiled filters. Now, the general rule of thumb here when we're talking oiled filters is that they're going to flow a little bit better compared to a dry filter. However, the dry filter will capture more particles overall, but really not a huge concern here because, again, the filter is enclosed, and therefore that will limit the amount of dust and elements that the filter will inevitably see. Now, the only drawback to an oiled filter such as this is that, yeah, they might require a little bit more maintenance when being cleaned and re-oiled. However, those dry filters, you don't have as much flexibility when it comes time to clean them. Basically, you're just gonna blow them off with some compressed air. That's about it. These guys can actually rinse off, re-oil, and will basically last you the lifetime of your truck. As far as benefits, well, obviously a more modified under hood appearance is one, but also the biggie here is expecting a little bump in both horsepower and torque. Now, we're not talking 20, 30 wheel horsepower from this alone, but typically high single digits, low double digits for both horsepower and torque, depending on the condition of the system and filter you are replacing. Now, if you're replacing something that's been on the truck forever, dirty, clogged up, well then, obviously you're gonna see some bigger gains overall. Now, owners will also sometimes benefit from things like improved throttle response, and even in some extreme rare cases, fuel economy, but obviously those experiences are gonna differ depending on how heavy your foot is. But outside of the sealed enclosure, again, extremely nice here at the S&B, especially at this price point. The rest of the components here are pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Now, we already covered the filter, of course, and that air box, but you're also receiving a rotomolded plastic intake tube along with a fresh snorkel that's going to mount on the radiator cover right in front of the intake itself. I like that. One of the only companies, by the way, to include that, and that is a very nice piece. You're also, of course, getting all the nuts and bolts, the hardware, the clamps, everything needed to get the system in place. Now, again, this kit does not require any tuning whatsoever, guys, so you can throw this thing on and go right out of the box without the need for essentially anything else. But now we want to segue into that installation process, and I'm going to call this a 2 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter. I think that's a bit on the strong side, but regardless, leave yourself about an hour or so and you should be good to go. But to give you a better idea of just how this job will go down on your Eco at home, here's an American Trucks customer to walk you through it.
Real quick, just to go over the tools that I used in this installation. It didn't recommend using an impact. I like to use that whenever tightening hose clamps and things like that. But you did need an 8mm and a 10mm for all your hose clamps. They're all 8mm. This was Phillips 8mm, 8mm on the inside there as well on the filter clamp. And then you had a 13mm that went on the inside of the air box that mounted to the fender. And I do recommend having a pair of snips, because at one point they do actually have you using zip ties. You know, you always have to cut the extra off the end of your zip ties. First step is to disconnect the negative battery terminal. That's a 10mm. I'm just going to go ahead and use my impact. Pull that off to the side, make sure that you don't lose your nut. All right, second step is to loosen this clamp up here. You can use a flathead if you want. Third step, rather, is to loosen the clamp leading to the passenger side turbo. Fourth step, loosen the clamp to the driver's side turbo, if I can find it. Ooh. All of the other hose clamps that we're going to be installing, we're probably going to leave them loose until the very, very end to make sure that we have everything positioned right. But for now, this one actually says to tighten up front. So we're going to be installing the front inlet onto the air box. It says use 2 plastic rivets on each hole and pinch them together to lock them in place. Yeah, all right, there we go. All right. Supplied rubber grommet for the engine air intake temperature sensor. Simple enough. All right, now we're getting into couplers and hose clamps. So you get 2 different size couplers and 2 different size clamps. There it is. One for the larger side, one for the smaller side. I'm going to go ahead and install hose clamps on here. So what that's going to be positioned this way, this is on here. Position the hose clamp. If you look down in here, there's actually 2 grommets inside where the factory air box was. And on the very bottom of the new air box, these will fit down into those grommets, and then this is going to mount in the same place as our factory air box did. So we're just going to pop this down into the truck. Hopefully in the right spot. That was easy enough, fell right into place. You got your wires back here out of the way. And the next step, it says, is to install that 13mm again. It says to remove the O-ring off of the intake air temperature sensor before installing it. And when you're trying to install it into the tube, you want to use kind of the spinning motion. And there is a line on the tube that you're supposed to line up the tab on the sensor with. I'm going to keep all of these factory parts just in case something happens and I have to go back to the factory airbox to install it. It says you use a twisting motion. And there's the tab it tells you to line up with. Feels pretty snug, so I'm going to leave it like that. We're going to try and squeeze this intake to the air filter down to the intake. That's no big deal. So I'm just going to pick up my intake tube and try to avoid everything else in the engine bay while I make this fit through that hole. It's not sliding super easy, but it isn't impossible. All right, it is in. I'll get things a little bit lined up here. It says try to align the inlet tubes on the turbos, the big one down here and the small one up here, with the intake tube. That way whenever you go to tighten them down, it's not going to be that big of a pain. Now this bottom one, pretty well met right up. I'm going to back it out a little bit, because I think I might have tightened a little bit too much. Just take that little bracket right here, take this nut, bolt, and washer. I'm going to put this through, and then on the inside of the airbox put the washer on. Hopefully with that vacuum thing hanging here, I'll still be able to access the hole. Would have been real helpful to have done before this point. So that nut head, the bolt head is a 7/16. The nut, 11 millimeters seems to fit it. So now that I actually have that bracket, that vacuum hose actually fits right on. I want you to go ahead and mount the air filter, which I don't like how they have this on here. I'm actually going to take the clamp off the filter if I can get it off with it still in the airbox, because I would prefer to tighten it with it facing me, not facing the opposite direction. So anybody else watching this, go ahead and take it off before you drop it in the airbox, just to make it a little bit easier on yourself. Slide the filter over the intake tube. Like I said, getting to it's important to me, so swap that around. It says to go ahead and tighten the clamp on the air filter whenever you get it mounted on the outside of the intake tube. You don't want to go crazy tight on any of this. It is rubber and plastic, so it grips pretty well. I don't think it's going to rattle loose or have any air leaks or anything. And then, yeah, definitely tighten. Don't go crazy with it. Don't over tighten your stuff. You know why I was having so much trouble with that? Because earlier in the instructions, it did tell you to slide the coupler as far back as you could. That way you can align the intake tube with the turbo inlet on this side. So I probably tighten that up just a little bit too much, but it is very frustrating for them to fall off while you're trying to mount them. So I'm gonna loosen them up just a little bit more and see if I can slide the coupler down now that we have it lined up. And it's going down pretty easy. All right, All right. And there is a tab on the side of this inlet tube. So when you've got the coupler slid down far enough, you'll meet that. What I am noticing is that these clamps do kind of get in a position where it's difficult to get to them. So as you're maneuvering, you want to try and get the head of the bolt facing you, because you got all these PCV tubes and everything in here they're gonna kind of get in your way. So I'm gonna get those facing where I can get to them. And then it says to do the exact same thing over here on the passenger side turbo inlet. I got kind of off kilter there. So immediately it's looking like they're not going to line up overly well. But that's what sliding the coupler forward is for. And while you leave everything loose until the very, very end. I think I got that as far on as it's going to go. It does say to go ahead and tighten up your hose clamps once you've gotten that far. I'm going to go ahead and just do this one by hand a little bit before I use my... Again, not the easiest to get to, but it's not terrible. And once they tighten down, they stay in place a little bit better. And make sure I can feel all the way around. Yeah, they're on pretty good. If I can help it, power tools are always better. Be careful not to over tighten if you're using an impact. It does kind of seem like they're wanting to drift apart. You can see there's a little bit of play, a little bit of wiggle room, because the only way this mounts is onto the turbo over here. There's nothing holding that in place. And it's a rubber boot down at the turbo, a coupler like this as well. So just make sure that you've got same thing on this side as you do over here. You've got these tabs that help the coupler, let you know that the coupler is as far on as it's going to go. And then just hold your clamp in place. Get it snug. Again, do not over tighten for power tools. I actually tightened up the clamps on the driver's side first. Maybe that contributed to this seeming like it didn't want to line up. It does say step 30 is to tighten your hose clamps on the passenger side turbo first, and then step 31 says to tighten the one. So live and learn. Just got a little ahead of myself. Your engine temperature sensor moved whenever we did this. It's all the way up here instead of being back here. So they do supply an extension. It comes in this bag right here. You can see this is where did it go? This is the wire. And it used to mount right about here. And so they give you an extension, and there's this other bracket that we had to disregard because it didn't matter to this year model vehicle. This is the extension that it says to use. And from right off the bat, it looks like the smaller one goes into this end, the bigger one goes on this end. Over here on the back of the air box, where we removed this wire, there's holes drilled into the aftermarket air box to allow you to push these tabs back in and hold them into place. I'm not able to see it currently. Oh, there it is down here below the S&B logo is what it said. All right, that's in place. There is, but it's kind of behind this. I don't know what this is, something to do with the brake booster. It's a little bit behind that, but you can still wiggle the tab in there and push it into the hole. All right. It's telling me to go ahead and install the 2 plastic rivets into the front inlet here, which is going to hold it down to our firewall. We got 2 of these. You're just going to line them up with the hole. Push them down first, and then push them down again. We're going to peel the covering off of the plexiglass now. So now we're going to take this rubber seal that they give us, and it doesn't say whether to start on the side or in the corner, so I'm just going to start right here in the middle, I guess. Again, guys, I'm not a mechanic, not the most graceful person working with my hands, so if you're sitting at home watching me struggle on this, you'll have to forgive me. I just like to tinker a little bit. And then you're going to place the lid on top of the airbox. And go ahead and get them started finger tight. Look at this top one. Get it from both ends. I'm actually going to snug these up with my impact. It specifies do not over tighten, so I'm going to be very careful with this. Once that washer flattens out, I'm just going to quit tightening. All right. And once you tighten the bolts or the screws down, it actually definitely makes the plexiglass fit a little bit nicer. Lines the holes up better. Come over here and hit our negative terminal back on, get a little sparky spark going on there.
But wrapping this one up, guys, if you're looking for one of the highest rated intakes on the site for your EcoBoost at a very attractive price point, well then you'll have to consider the S&B for your rig right here at AmericanTrucks.com.